The Sahara, 9 million square kilometers of scorching sand, the largest arid desert on Earth, a place where in vast areas practically no rain falls and where the heat has already doomed many lost travelers. And right here, in this surreal expanse of sand and rock, engineers and visionaries want to create something incredible, an artificial sea, an ocean in the middle of the desert. Today we'll look at how this crazy plan came about, what visions were behind it, and why even atomic bombs were in the mix. It sounds like science fiction, yet the plan to flood the Sahara has been on the minds of scientists, military officials, and governments for more than a century, right up to the present day. From Scottish entrepreneurs to American nuclear physicists, they all dreamed of transforming the arid Sahara into a lush paradise. The story begins in 1878. Donald Mackenzie, a Scottish entrepreneur, ran a trading post on the West African coast. Goods from Central Africa reached him via caravans that traveled through the Sahara for weeks on end. Slowly, laboriously, and in limited quantities, Mackenzie had never traveled to Central Africa himself, but he listened to the reports of traders and nomads and developed a bold theory. In his opinion, the El Djouf region in present-day Mauritania, near the border with Mali, lay below sea level. If a canal were dug from the Atlantic Ocean, stretching thousands of kilometers, this region would flood on its own. The result, a massive lake covering more than 150,000 square kilometers, almost twice the size of Lake Superior in North America. Mackenzie dreamed of building canals all the way to the Niger River. European ships could then sail directly to Sudan and gain access to its resources. At the same time, he believed the new sea would enable agriculture in the desert and help end the slave trade in the region, a practice Mackenzie strongly opposed. Mackenzie was likely inspired by smaller depressions he had seen on the Atlantic coast. For example, the Sebkata, located just 15 kilometers from the ocean and 55 meters below sea level. He was also familiar with seasonal salt lakes in Tunisia and Egypt. Yet Mackenzie's plan had a fatal flaw. El Djouf is not below sea level. In fact, the region lies about 320 meters above it. Nevertheless, his proposal received considerable media attention. The Daily Telegraph and Vanity Fair praised the plan's potential and called for a serious review. However, investments failed to materialize and Mackenzie turned his attention to other projects. These included founding the successful Northwest Africa Trading Company and his campaign against slavery in East Africa. In the 1870s, Ferdinand de Lesseps was one of the most famous Frenchmen in the world. In 1869, he had opened the Suez Canal. The French government awarded him the prestigious title of Viscount. The press called him Le Grand Français, the Great Frenchman. De Lesseps had further ambitions. He teamed up with the military geographer François-Élie Roder to develop a new plan. They wanted to connect the Gulf of Gabès in the Mediterranean with Chott el Djerid, a seasonal salt lake in Tunisia that lies below sea level and is dry most of the year. Based on plans Roder published in the journal Revue des Deux Mondes in 1874, the artificial sea was to be fed by a 190-kilometer-long canal and cover an area of around 5,000 square kilometers, twice as large as the Great Salt Lake in Utah. De Lesseps and Roder had various justifications for their project. One of them was the remarkable idea that an inland sea in Tunisia would improve the weather in Europe. Roder, a captain in the French army, also saw the sea as a strategic advantage for France's geopolitical plans in North Africa. The Berlin Conference was imminent, and the scramble for Africa, in which France would occupy Tunisia as a protectorate in 1881, began just a few years later. Although France ultimately encountered no resistance during the invasion of Tunisia, Roder saw the inland sea as a means to isolate rebellious tribes in the south and facilitate the pacification of the region. In fact, French imperialism played a major role in the plan's popularity in the late 19th century. Nationalism was on the rise, and Europe's great powers were vying not only for colonies, but also for prestige. Roder believed that Chott el Djerid was in fact the site of the Bay of Triton, a body of water described in ancient Greek texts. According to Greek mythology, one day a descendant of the legendary Argonauts would come and establish 100 Greek cities around the bay. The symbolic recreation of the Bay of Triton was intended to demonstrate that France was the heir to the enlightened European values that originated in Greece. and that it was the rightful successor to the Roman Empire. In contrast to rivals such as Great Britain, Germany, and Italy, Roder won de Lesseps over to the plan by convincing him that the inland sea would significantly improve the climate and thus the economic conditions in Algeria and Tunisia. The evaporating water could theoretically generate clouds that would stabilize temperatures, and streams that normally dried up before reaching Chott el Djerid would become rivers that irrigated the surrounding land for agriculture. Furthermore, the sea would facilitate trade in the region. All of this would presumably improve the standard of living for the local population. De Lesseps was able to convince the Academy of Sciences of the plan's feasibility. The French government subsequently granted Roder a budget of 35,000 francs for a detailed study of the area. Was the dream of a flooded Sahara finally about to become reality? Roder undertook 2 expeditions, but his findings were disappointing. Much less of the area lay below sea level than expected, especially the parts closer to the Mediterranean. He and de Lesseps had to revise their plans, a much longer canal and a smaller sea. The French Academy decided that the project was no longer feasible. The cost would exceed 1 billion francs, far more than the original estimate of 25 million francs. 1 French franc in 1880 was equivalent to about 0.29 grams of gold. 1 billion francs is equivalent to approximately $17 billion today. The French government withdrew its funding, but de Lesseps and Roder did not give up. Using their own money, they founded the Société d'études de la mer intérieure africaine, the Society for African Inland Sea Studies. Roder then led another expedition in Tunisia. He returned to France with a fever, to a scientific and military community that strongly criticized his obsession with the inland sea. Shortly thereafter, he died at the age of only 48. De Lesseps and Roder's research society continued. However, they scaled back their ambitions to establishing an agricultural colony near the Gulf of Gabes with the help of wells, but even that proved too much, and the society dissolved in 1892. De Lesseps focused on his other major project, the Panama Canal, but these plans ultimately ended in a bribery scandal that landed him in prison in 1893. He died a year later. Nevertheless, the plan remained in the French imagination. Other French scientists revived the idea time and again throughout the 20th century. It also inspired the development of various canals in Tunisia. Roder's vision, however, was realized only in fiction. The famous author Jules Verne incorporated the proposal into his 1905 novel, The Invasion of the Sea. In it, Berbers and Europeans fought over the plans before an earthquake created the sea without human intervention. So things didn't look promising for the inland sea in the Sahara, but thanks to technological progress, the dream was revived years later. In the mid-20th century, it was the Americans' turn to take up the idea of creating a sea in the Sahara. Their idea was somewhat more drastic. They wanted to blast a crater in the desert with atomic bombs. Far from being a far-fetched fringe idea, this proposal was part of Project Blowshare, a US federal government program aimed at finding peaceful engineering applications for nuclear devices. Launched in 1957, the project was part of the Global Atoms for Peace initiative promoted by President Dwight D. Eisenhower in 1953. Project Blowshare got quite creative. The Sahara Lake wasn't even the most ambitious proposal. For example, Project Cariol would have cut through the Bristol Mountains and the Mojave Desert to make way for Interstate 40 and the Santa Fe Railway, using 22 nuclear explosions. There were also proposals for mining and other underground purposes, such as connecting underground aquifers and accessing oil and natural gas deposits. However, Project Blowshare's primary focus seemed to be on manipulating waterways. One of the proposals seriously considered was Project Chariot, a plan to create a fully artificial harbor at Cape Thompson on Alaska's northwest coast. This was ultimately abandoned after several studies on radioactive fallout carried into the area from nuclear test sites showed that it would negatively impact the local environment and population. Even larger proposals included the expansion of the Panama Canal, the creation of an entirely new Trans-American Canal through Nicaragua, and the carving out of an alternative route to the Suez Canal through the Negev Desert in Israel to the Gulf of Aqaba on the Red Sea. This latter proposal would have required the creation of a waterway over 250 kilometers long, more than 25% longer than the Suez Canal itself, using 520 nuclear warheads, each with a yield of 2 megatons. That is equivalent to 125 times the yield of the atomic bomb dropped on Hiroshima. This radical plan gained traction because the Suez Canal had become one of the most important strategic assets of the Cold War. This was particularly true after the Egyptian government nationalized it in 1956, leading to the Suez Crisis. The US wanted an alternative within an allied nation, and alongside all these more dramatic proposals, officials involved in Project Blowshare also suggested nuclear weapons as a solution to the Sahara Sea problem. One idea was to use 213 nuclear bombs, each with a yield of 1.5 megatons, as part of the Qattara Depression project. This project aimed to create an inland sea in northern Egypt. The explosions would create a channel from the Mediterranean Sea to the Depression, which lies about 60 meters below sea level. This would create an inland sea with high evaporation, leading to a constant inflow of water that could be harnessed for hydroelectric power. Some even suggested using nuclear explosions to revive de Lesseps and Rodaire's plans for the Tunisian Choughs. However, none of these plans were realized. Growing global opposition to nuclear technologies, particularly after the Cuban Missile Crisis, caused Project Blowshare to lose momentum until funding was completely discontinued in 1977. De Lesseps and Rodaire's idea of creating an inland sea in the Tunisian Choughs was finally revived in the 21st century by a non-profit organization called Corporation Road, or CORO. Founded by professionals and experts in Mediterranean cooperation from around the world, CORO aims to build a canal from the Gulf of Gabes that would flood the Choughs. Just like the original French proposal from the 19th century, CORO claims that the project would massively benefit Tunisia and the entire Mediterranean region in various ways. In a nation with around 35% youth unemployment, the economy would benefit from a large number of new jobs. The inland sea would also curb desertification. Evaporation from the sea would lead to increased precipitation and cloud cover. These climatic changes could enable agriculture, fish farming, and livestock raising in the area, in addition to boosting tourism. Ultimately, the economic improvement would reduce migration from Tunisia to the European Union, particularly Italy, and instead make Tunisia itself a magnet for migrant workers in North Africa. CORO's Sahara Sea is still in the planning phase, but received approval from the Tunisian government in 2018, an important first step. With nearly 150 years of history, the idea of a sea in the Sahara seems to be one that humanity just can't let go of. Although it is currently limited to the pages of Jules Verne's books, it might not be long before someone finally finds a way to flood the desert. From Scottish dreamers to French imperialists to American nuclear physicists, the plan to flood the Sahara shows just how far human ambition can reach. The question remains, was it ever a realistic vision, or just the dream of people who believed they could shape nature according to their will? Feel free to share your thoughts in the comments. Is creating an inland body of water in the Sahara a good idea, or is it unrealistic megalomania? I'm really looking forward to your comments and discussions, and please excuse me if I mispronounced any of the names. Otherwise, I'd say see you in the next video. Take care, everyone.